What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Ride with your host, Zach Quezada. Today's guest is Eric Dunne, head coach at Farmingdale Lacrosse and University of Albany alum. Now, today's topics include developing the correct way to teach defensive checking, structuring your preseason off-season strategy, how fellow Danes such as Jake Piseno and the Thompson brothers are changing our game, and his run of taking Farmingdale to the Long Island Class A state championship final just last year. As always, I hope you find these conversations valuable and enjoy the ride. All right, Eric, welcome to The Ride, man. I wanted to open up today's show by asking if you had a Pat Aiello story, because he is the one that connected us.
So it was really cool. I got to watch Pat be on the show, and Pat and I have like a very unique friendship that kind of developed out of last show out of nowhere. Pat was interviewing for a job in Farmingdale, and we just kind of started talking through text messages, and you know, he was going through the interview process, so I was trying to help him and get him contacted with all the people involved, and my director and my principal and stuff like that, and give him interview questions. And we just started talking lacrosse. And then, unfortunately, he didn't end up getting the job, but we kept talking, and we just kept kind of checking up in the season. And how you doing, man? How you doing? We're talking about what was going on with Long Island lacrosse, and he's from Massapequa. I coach in Farmingdale, so you kind of got a little bit of the rivalry. And he ended up getting the head coaching job at Kellum. And the next thing you know, like we're talking all the time. And we both kind of catch heat at the end of the season. We go on these crazy playoff rides, and we're both superstitious guys. And we're like, yo, I talked to you before the first playoff win. We're going to have to talk before every game. So the next thing I know, it's like, game day. And I'm there at 6 a.m. texting back and forth with Pat about how he's doing, what he's getting ready for his game prep. He's texting me back. He's watching film, sending me clips. And a friendship just kind of developed out of that. So I actually didn't get to meet Pat until this summer when he came back home, and we were able to head up the tap room and get some lunch and get to learn a little bit more about him as a person. And just seems like a great dude, and wishing him all the best. And I thank him for putting me in touch with you, and just good people meeting good people through lacrosse, which seems to happen a lot when you're from the island.
Yeah, when he sent me the message, hey, you should have Eric on the podcast, he sent me a video of your FLG kind of instructional on the board, X's and O's stuff, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be awesome. So we'll dive deep into all that stuff, man. Happy to have you, and you're the third Long Island guy that has hopped up on the show as well in its short history, so I'm just getting inundated with you guys, so I feel like I'm getting a little bit of a pass here.
You'll have the accent before too long.
Yeah, we'll see about that. Well, before we press live, you were talking about just like what you're doing, and obviously the season's changing, falls upon us. You're doing some Oktoberfest things here shortly. What are you guys up to around this time, man? It's, again, late September. I'm assuming you guys might be doing some stuff on the lacrosse side of things. What's going on?
So right now, as far as school goes, we have so many guys that play football that we kind of leave the guys alone in the fall. And then, we know they're lifting. We know they're playing other sports. A couple guys that will start in the next week or two, where we'll start going out and shooting and doing some footwork stuff to get guys ready for November. But we do try to let the fall sports have fall sports, because, in Farmingdale, football is king. There's no doubt about it. So, we let those guys kind of do it. So right now I'm more into working with Shore to Shore, getting those guys up and running for the fall. And then I run my own private training company called PSL Defense, which is Poke, Slap, Lift. So we do Tuesday nights over there, which is awesome. I love the instructional piece of coaching individual defense. Like, to me, that's where you get to see kids grow leaps and bounds. And, right now we're working from everybody 2028 down to like 2032. So, it's really cool to see some of those guys, you're talking about just teaching stance and approaches and angles, and it's really cool. So I have 3 other guys who played for me that work with me on those Tuesday nights. So it's really cool too to watch them echo out a lot of the teaching points that we do in practice.
It's awesome seeing the growth of other coaches. That I feel like that part of the game doesn't really get talked about. It's always coach, player, but having those players that maybe just finished, their time playing the game, to being a soft-spoken or maybe not wanting to say something when something goes wrong in practice, to making the full transition is a wonder in and of itself.
And it's always interesting, trying to coach young guys into those roles too, right? Some guys are natural with it. I have this kid, Mike Algano, right now, who's a 26, and he is from the time he was a freshman, a talker, a leader. Like last year, he's probably like, one of our best communicators on the field. And he's just like dives right in. And I've had other guys who are awesome. I had this guy, Timmy Hegarty, who played for me years ago, who was an All-American, went to Hofstra. And his first couple of years, it's like, all right, Tim, like, I'm going to step back for a second, man. You got to talk. You got to do something, like earn your paycheck here. And then he went and coached with me at FLG for a couple of years. And by the time it was over, I'm like, wow, we're actually yelling things at the same time. I could back off and like, you got this. Like, go ahead, man. Like, so that was really cool to watch him develop into a guy who in game was like all over it and had the adjustments and was on kids and like in a positive way. So it was really cool to watch that transition too.
All right, there was a poke slap lift in there when you were talking about some of your defensive training. Yeah. That already gets me tingling from the defensive side. I'm a coordinator on the defensive side currently, and the poke slap lift, the order at which you teach checks, the importance at which you tell guys, hey, this, you need to be throwing this here, or you need to remove this completely from your game or something like that. Poke, slap, lift, is that in order of what you're teaching, or how do you kind of look at pokes, slaps, and lifts?
I mean, poke should always happen first, right? I mean, and then, depending on where you're on the field, that's kind of the combo. We do one drill in particular. We call it the stay sticky drill, where like, if you've ever seen like offensive guys call it like quarterback, running back, right? Where the guy drives to the cone, he steps back, he's got his hands up. And so we call it the stay sticky drill, which is like the defensive equivalent, right? We want to defend that dodger. We want him to create space, and now we want to disrupt his hands, right? So we're getting that poke, that slap, that lift, right? Trying to as many quick checks as possible. And of course, obviously, the poke check needs to be the first and foremost in all of those combinations. And so that's kind of where we came with the name, because I was looking for any sort of unique defensive name that would work for the company. And I was like, you know what? PSL could work.
Yeah.
It's short, it works, and it kind of incorporates that idea of like how we want to play defense.
So is there an incorporation of all three? Like, I know that obviously on different types of the fields, different scenarios, all that stuff, but are you looking for your defenders to throw a combination of those checks through their time in one-on-one? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think that when you talk about, especially on a longer dodge, right? You got to get that poke check. You want to establish your cushion. It drives me. I'm not like a huge over checker, but if a guy's going to run with the ball for any sort of time, just carrying, like, you've got to challenge him. You got to touch him, so there's your slap. And then I also believe in the best time to take the ball away from guys are when they're trying to catch, throw, and shoot. So like that lift's got to get in there, no free passes. I say no free lunch. You can't let guys just pass the ball around the perimeter and have their hands free, which I think is something that's kind of not taught all the time, weirdly. Guys are so worried about whether or not they get beat. All of a sudden, the guy steps off and he's got his hands free, and the guy's like, oh, well, my job here is done. Mm-hmm. And so we want to make sure we're in those hands and lifting and disrupting.
How do you teach that from a psychological perspective? Because I know every defensive coach, and to some extent an offensive coach, understands when the D's not providing pressure at those critical moments. How do you psychologically get your guys to just say, hey, dudes, don't let up there? You're doing the get sticky drill. I love that drill where they kind of have a step off and you have to continue the approach. How do you kind of teach your guys to, hey, we need to get that at the critical moment?
I mean, I find myself yelling this all the time in practice. Is just like hands, like constantly yelling hands, hands, whether it's even in like transition drills. I think one of my biggest pet peeves with a lot of young defenders is they're coming out to the ball and they're waving their stick. I try to explain it to them like, guys, that's a maybe a 10% play. If you've got great hand-eye coordination, if you just skewer through that guy's hands, that's like a 90% chance you're going to disrupt it, And same thing, once you defend, you can tell that guy's got the cross check or the V hold, and he's doing a good job of driving that guy out. And you see that guy step off, we're yelling hands, 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 right? That's the best time. That's I think you kind of have to remind kids a lot of too. Like the takeaway checks are beautiful if you can just dislodge the ball, but the best way to take the ball away from an attackman is when they're trying to catch and throw.
Yeah. I knew we were going to get into the X's and O's right away. I'm so excited that we are, because that means we have a whole episode of this. But when you're throwing the poke check, for example, what part of the body or what part of the stick, or how are you saying, hey, this is where we want to hit and with this much pressure and all that stuff?
So we've tried to do, we do a lot of drills. But the biggest thing I think that where young defenders get screwed up, and we do a lot of drills to work on this, is everybody breaks down and throws the poke check on the breakdown, which means your feet aren't moving. So like we try to work a lot on like break down, get yourself moving backwards, and then throw that poke check. I'm not a huge one-handed poke check guy. I feel like, when you come across fast dodgers, they get into your hands and next thing you know, like you got one hand on the stick, and like now you're fighting off your heels. So we work a lot on that concept of just like sliding. Believe it or not, it sounds crazy to those of us that grew up in like the 2000s. The concept of sliding your top hand or your bottom hand through your top hand and not bringing your hand back too far and keeping that short little poke is like actually becoming art with young defenders. A lot of guys stab. They don't move their feet. And what I'm talking about placement wise, I want it to be in the upfield shoulder right in between the numbers. Like don't worry about trying to get their stick. If your poke check can land right in that chest, in that upfield shoulder, that means you've probably rerouted that guy the way that we want him to go. And it's just about having, like I talk about, if you're looking at people boxing, that's your jab. You just want to keep him at a distance. You want to keep that cushion and make him know. You want to try and make yourself as long as possible there to make him have to make that move nice and far away.
I love that you bring in the boxing piece because, doing some research before the show, I've noticed that you do a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that idea of like one-on-one combat sport transitioning to one-on-one with lacrosse, I think, is an underrated aspect. Like if you can do certain things or you understand the way a guy is going to move in a jiu-jitsu sense, that probably translates to the lacrosse field in some sense, either psychological or, again, in a skill. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's funny because, like, before I started PSI, you do like a private lesson here, a private lesson there. And when you're really working one-on-one with kids, you get to really get into those details. And it's really move, counter move, right? So like we used to do a lot of like one-on-ones and listen, if this guy is trying to question mark, we've got to drive that bottom hip. We can't let him get the easy turn, hand placement becomes really important. One thing I think about all the time, with jiu-jitsu is like understanding where that guy wants to try to get to and knowing when you're in a little bit of trouble or knowing when you're in real trouble, and I think that that's really pertains a lot to even when you just think about how prevalent the rollback has become in lacrosse, right? That guy's coming back. You got to be able to sit on that. You got to know when that guy's coming heavy to his strong hand, being able to sit back and punch that hip. So I think there's a lot of, when you watch guys and you coach in one-on-ones and you do a little of the offense, defense, one-on-one stuff, that move, counter move, understanding what your guys like to do. We do a lot of scouting at Farmingdale, knowing what guys' tendencies are, right? So if a guy is a heavy righty and he's going left, just sit on it coming back. If he beats your lefty, kudos to him, or that a guy's a heavy inside roller, we're going to send that slide nice and early. And I think that those things really matter a lot, We talk a lot about the bounce move, how do you defend against the bounce, making sure that you step upfield and you get that stick out, you crowd that space, don't let them get above your top hand, all those types of things where, again, knowing what the offensive guy wants to do and what is the counter to that offensive move.
Sure. Is it the bounce move you were discussing? Is that when they're coming from X and they just take a quick bounce out and then they redodge?
Yeah, re-square.
Okay. Got it.
We do what we call re-square bounce.
Okay. You mentioned the scouting report. It would be a shocker to you to figure that I'm actually love that part of the game as well. Yeah. What's the point of like where you've gone too far? Because that's something I always think about when I'm putting together these scouting reports. Like maybe I'm giving them too much info where they can't play free, and I'm just inundating them with too much.
I think it's, we saw our scouting reports are really in depth. And again, I'm probably with you. I probably do too much. But I've found that it's helped our kids have a lot of confidence. I go the other way, do you need to know all 6 players, guys, tendencies, super heavy? No, but it's nice to have it if that's the guy that you're primarily going to be on, and we do a lot of stuff in terms of writing and diagramming. I'm a big believer in kids learn all different ways being a teacher, right? So we're giving you numbers, hands, goals, assists, because I think that matters too, right? Is this guy a feeder? Is he a scorer? Is he threat number 1 or is he threat number 3? And then we do give a lot of personal moves. I even put in there for the goalies about where guys like to shoot from watching film, because some guys just shoot the same shot over and over and over again. And we've had really good goalies, and I'm not taking anything away from them. But they'll tell you too, like sometimes if you just listen to that scouting report, guys shoot near side high when they're coming around that goal all the time, and you can just camp on it. And then, like I said, we get into like the kind of team stuff, and this way we know everybody's calls and where we're coming from and stuff like that. And we do quizzes at Farmingdale, to be perfectly honest. Like we give out that scouting report, and we ask questions, and if you don't get it right, we got a little goalpost for you to go touch.
Is this so? This is during practice. My guys will hate this, by the way. The fact
Oh,
that you
this is
brought
during
this to my
practice.
attention.
Oh yeah, this is in front of everybody. Oh yeah.
Oh man, that's
Well,
awesome.
you know what's great though is like kids are awesome too, because right, it becomes like kids are helping each other cheat. You know, hear guys whispering under the breath. The guys who do know are like, "Hey man, by the way, like he's a righty. Like, you know, we'll do anything from hands to what a call is and stuff like that." And it's funny because you watch the evolution of your team too, right?
Sure.
The kids in the beginning of the year don't take it as seriously, and then all of a sudden you struggle a little bit. The last 2 years we've gone to the state final. We've been 3-3 to start the year.
Yeah.
And there's always that turning point where the older guys like, yo, guys, like he's giving us the answers. Can you please just study? So
Sure.
this way we can start winning games. And by the end of the year, I said the thing that I love the most is the scout guys, because the scout guys that we have, they don't want to be scout guys in the beginning of the year. So they're a little mopey and it's like, I don't want to do it. They get these scouting reports, and by the end of the year, they're like, all right, what number am I going to be when they come into my classroom to pick it up? And it's like, all right, inside roll, I got it. No problem, coach. Like they know where they belong on the man ups and everything else like that. So it's cool to like see how much kids buy in when they see the value of that stuff.
I have to remember to ask you about the scout team and how you set that up, because it's something I haven't really implemented from a concept of like, hey, I've got these 6 offensive guys, scouts that can really help the defense. So hopping back into the one-on-one piece, how do you think about putting hands on a guy, right? Like some guys, you know, are taught to, hey, put hands on a guy early. Obviously some guys are playing position until the last moment, and then, you know, right about GLE, they're putting hands. What do you think about kind of that bump or that kind of hold aspect, or where you're putting hands on a guys as opposed to a slap or a lift or
So
what have
I
you?
always try to teach guys. So let me preface it with this, because I believe that playing LSM and D midi is way different than playing on the wings and behind the goal. So if you're playing on the wings and behind the goal, our basic philosophy is the further you get from the goal, the more you use your stick. The closer you get to the goal, the more you lose your hands. I don't want guys getting hands on people all the way in the corner, because unless you got great feet, you're going to get dusted. You know, and it's also, we teach that a lot with some of the drills when we're talking about holding guys at goal line. We don't want to turn guys 2 steps past X, because now they've got a shorter, you know, route back to the other side of the goal. We want to let guys almost get to goal line before we turn them. And now it's a nice long run back to the other side. But as far as above the goal goes, now you got to talk about something different. Now you got to go hands on as soon as you're inside the top of the box. We've got to get our hands on people, and we've got to be able to stop them from getting it so that you don't get condensed. Because again, I've coached a lot of middle school lacrosse. I used to have the 8th graders at FLG every year. And you're constantly seeing guys back in the box. And by the time they get their hands on them, they're taking like 2 steps in a shot.
Yep.
So we always say 2 yards outside the box. The earlier we can get our hands on guys up top, especially, that means the earlier the slide can get there and the better off we'll be.
How are you teaching that body contact to them? Like, are we redirecting them? Are we trying to just put hands in control, or are you trying to, you know, bump them off a line? How do you teach that to your short 6 and LSM?
So to me, like this is all getting into like, I think I always compare like playing defense to playing offensive line. For those people who've never watched or never played football, and you watch offensive line, you go, oh, these 5 guys just run into each other. You know, it doesn't look very complicated at all. Like pushing in lacrosse to me is really, really important. We talk about how our feet need to be lined up. You know, I want my guys, you know, top side foot higher than their inside foot, which is pretty typical. The biggest thing I find I must have to teach is not having guys turn their hips to the sideline. A lot of guys want to like turn sideways, and now all of a sudden when the guy gets back to the middle, they're dropping, you know. So, and I'm also a big switch hands guy, especially in high school. You got 4 years to work on it with the short sticks. Short sticks don't usually throw checks. That's kind of our thing. I got one really good D-midi the last 2 years who now started with the crowbar. But
I love the crowbar, baby.
I tried to tell him, I'm like, listen, when you're on the number 1 guy and you're throwing that crowbar and you get beat, just realize you're going to be hearing me from the sideline.
It's a long walk back.
Well, because again, like he's got such incredible feet and such a great jam and physicality to him. And I'm like, if you just play defense, then nobody's beating you. And to me, if you limit the amount of stick checks the guys actually throw, and you do switch hands and you just teach guys to jam, midi defense should be very, very simple. You know?
Yeah.
And as long as you're getting a piece of that guy, I don't think you need to run block guys. I think the more you try to really like hang clean people, and I've had guys that have a lot of trouble when you try to hang clean people, your feet ends up getting stopped. Like you don't move your feet. So we try to teach guys to pop. Like I want to try and just jam you with like my elbows almost at a 90-degree angle. I don't want my hands out too far. I don't want to do the bench press where you're coming all the way in and trying to shove you out. I want to make contact, and I want to make contact at like 90 degrees. And once I've rerouted you off of your initial move, then I've kind of done what I needed to do.
I've gotten more in love with the holds as we've seen it proliferate through college. Like I think 10 years ago, you weren't seeing the holds and the revos being thrown, all this stuff that you see like crazy. And Mike Morgan had a great point that like, I don't want to see the crowbar to cause a turnover, right? More times than not, that's probably going to be a flag, to be honest. If you're like pushing the guy over and it's an easy call. I hate when that easy call, which isn't really a push, but they're going to call it that way. I would much rather just use that as a way to kind of reestablish defense, right? So, yeah, man, it's a really. You have anything there? Sorry.
I was just going to say that it's crazy to me when you watch it. It's just so interesting coaching high school and then watching college, right? And then you get the college officials who come down and do the high school games at the end of the year, and like they ref it completely differently. We had that same D-Mitty, crowbar a guy from Massapequa, perfect on his hip, under the arm, shoved him. And the next thing you know, like you said, it's a flag.
Flag.
Wait a second, I watched you do the Final Four a week ago, and that was happening all over the field, and it was perfectly fine. Like, so it does add a lot of gray area too into what's a hole, what's not a hole. So you're always playing with fire when you start doing stuff like that.
The nuance between the LSM and the D-Mitty teaching, right? Obviously, you have the extra feet of stick, but how else do you kind of look at the LSM versus the midfield defense at that point of the field?
See, I think what we try to teach our LSMs is to play more like the D-Middies, right? Use that stick when you're in danger. If you're getting, again, far, far away from the goal, that's your time to use it to go after guys. But when you're inside the box, you almost have to play more like a D-Middie. Now, do you have the ability to get under guys' elbows a little bit easier? Absolutely. Do you have the ability to disrupt their hands? That's when we want to try and do that. But you got to be careful reaching too much. I think that's a bad habit that a lot of young LSMs get in. I try to explain to them the idea of like, hey, man, when you bring your stick over, that you're the slide guy is responsible for that front side gap. Now your stick is in the way of the slide, and nobody's preventing the rollback. So we try to keep discipline on that part and let them play more like a short stick mid. But I think the biggest thing for the LSM is that half the time you're not getting dodged. You got to be great in the slide package.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, they're usually off-ball players. That's a really good point. Kind of jumping back into that one-on-one play when it came to like lifts and holds and stuff like that. How much are you teaching these guys to get up under the armpit and lift? Because to me, that's been where I've leaned in the most, is saying, guys, like, I just want you up underneath the armpit. That's where you can get the most control.
Yeah, and so I think like that's, when we talk about V-holding is kind of become like a lost art in a lot of times when you watch and stuff. And to me, if you've got guys who can really feed, like you have to be able to V-hold. Like I think you've got to be able to teach both. So we want to get underhands. I see a lot of guys, again, we talk a lot about the idea of when guys think they're throwing V-holds, they're really throwing a can opener. And that's when you end up getting, called for a hold, because we always talk about you don't want your backhand higher than your top hand. You have no power there. So it's important that you're able to get up and under while keeping your backhand down so that you can have that leverage to get up under the armpit, because now you've kind of really neutralized everything that guy can do. And it should be a clear indicator. If you got a hot guy, he can almost go on a double. And now it's not a slide, it's a double, and changing that mentality to being aggressive. Like, we've got this guy right where we want him. I will say when they go to your stick side, I don't encourage as much to lift under the bottom hand.
Okay.
The reason being, we try to preach, like when a guy gets above your top hand defensively, you're usually beat. So if you don't get that lift, he's now into your stick, and he's probably going to be able to turn the corner. So if he's bringing his arms back to shoot and you want to get under that elbow, awesome. If he's bringing his hands back to feed and you want to prevent his elbow from coming under, great. But if he's trying to kind of dodge and he's got two hands in that heavy cradle, chances are you're probably not going to lift that arm all the way up unless you're a really, dominant athlete. And now he's going to be above your top hand and you're going to be in a little bit of trouble.
Tell me a little bit about what you see from this guy who went to your alma mater, Albany, the cat, the LSM dude. It's escaping. What's his name?
Pisano.
Yeah, he is an absolute freak with that stick, man. Like, tell me what you see when you watch this kid and what makes him so great.
Well, I think that a lot of it is like he's all over the field in terms of just like applying pressure to the ball and being in your hands. And he does such a great job of setting the overhead check. I mean, it's crazy to me. The guys know that it's coming. And it's like the 90s back there when you watch the film. He's going and he's landing it, and he does such a great job. He just barely gets it over the head, and he sets it up so well. And, he's explosive. Like, you forget this guy is, I think, like 5'10", 5'11", and he's punching the sky on guys who are 6'1", 6'2".
Yep. I don't know how he does that.
It's awesome, and you love to see the takeaway come back into the game. And like I said, I think he does a great job of setting up with that nice deep poke. And it's really cool to see guys from Albany kind of change the game in creative ways. And they found a way with the Thompson brothers to make offense look incredibly cool and open a floodgate into reintroducing how guys dodge and about some of the shots that guys take. And now you're seeing it again with that same Native American presence in terms of being able to punch the sky on guys and playing that up and down.
He's a Native American?
He played for the Iroquois national team.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right. That's awesome, man.
But that's where he got a lot of credibility. He was, I think, on the World All-Star team.
Okay. I want to get into Albany and stuff that you kind of learned under Coach Marr, but I want to stay also in this discussion because I just love where we ended up right away. The kid's also like 5'10", like you mentioned, 5'10", 5'11". And, when I started to see large defensemen and it being seen in the Division I game as like, you need to be 6'4", or even let's take it to the Virginia route of like, you need to be 6'7".
Yeah.
I hated that because I always thought having a utility guy that could cover a smaller guy was always the case. But then they were telling me, no, you need to be 6'5" to be the defenseman. How do you think about that?
So I get into this discussion a lot with college coaches, and it's interesting because you get a couple of different perspectives, right? We had a really good guy a couple of years ago, All-American, this kid Lorenzo Ramos, and he was probably, again, like 5'10", but he was squatting like 400 pounds in high school. And when he put his hands on you, he moved you. And he started at Binghamton for all 4 years, and it's been really good for them. I think that you're right. You can't have an army of 5'9" guys. You're going to have some guys who can match up and be big. But I think Gavin Adler's another guy that's kind of showed you, like, you don't have to be this monstrous defenseman to be effective, because the reality is when you look at these teams and you step on the field next to Grant Ament, he's not 6'2". And when you're 6'7", trying to get your hands on a guy that's 5'10" in his hips, that's a long way to get down. So, I'm a firm believer that it's nice to have, a good guy with quick feet and a good cover guy who's able to get on hips and reroute guys. And I think that sometimes when you look at the size of guys, you got to look at their lower body and their feet and how strong they are down there, and maybe not so much on just the measurable of the height.
Why do you think Lars made that like conscious decision to be like, I'm going to start the Jurassic Park theme that everybody always mentions? I'm just interested because it's such an outlier a little bit, but it is moving more that way.
Listen, I had the luxury to go down to Duke last winter and watch those guys practice. And when you're around them, it's one AA football team. I mean, everybody down there, except for maybe one of their starters, was 6'3". I think that some of that is just the ability to pick the guys that are 6'7", that can run like deer and can get their hips on, hands on guys. So you do have that pick of the litter in terms of guys who have incredible feet, incredible skills, because you're talking about the 1%ers.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important to kind of, even like what you were talking about with Jake, is he's a 1%er in what he does, and I think that's interesting sometimes when you're coaching guys. Like, if you want to be a 1%er, then you better work like a 1%er. If you want to throw those checks like that, you better really work at it,
Amen.
And understand that those are guys who really worked at their craft, And the same thing like we're talking about with Virginia, and Duke, you're looking at guys who be playing 1AA football, running around at 6'7", who have incredible feet, so they can get away with it. But I've had a lot of defensemen at Farmingdale who were incredibly successful in college that were not necessarily these huge guys, but I think, had really good lacrosse IQ, had really good skills, understood the game. I think the other thing that I try to talk to college coaches about that goes back to what we're kind of discussing here is, and I talk about with my guys, you like the guy who's 6'4", but you're on ball 1/6 of the time, maybe. So if that guy is 6'4", his feet are all good, but not great, but he doesn't have an idea how to play team defense. You better hope he's covering the best guy really well every single time, because sometimes those guys that change the direction and stuff like that is not always the best. But, listen, there's obviously size has its advantage. There's no doubt about it. But I just think that, attackmen don't come in the same shape and size. And so, therefore, I don't think that defensemen necessarily matchup-wise come in the same shape and size.
I love the pace of this convo. I want to maybe go back very quickly to the checking and all that stuff. Is there one check maybe we left off the board here while we were talking about it that you probably teach your guys that we didn't talk about, right? You talked about poke, slap, and lift. Is there another one that maybe you throw out there that comes up sometimes that you think is effective?
The V-hold, like I said, is one of the most under or poorly taught, I should say, concepts in youth lacrosse, but it's super effective when it's used correctly. And then like we do teach takeaway checks. I think wrap checks in the basic, concept of keeping you in trail positions like back wraps and stuff like that are incredibly useful because sometimes it does force you to trail, and it's a great opportunity to take the ball away from guys when they change direction. And we even teach the young guys the kayaks and stuff like that. Why not have it in your repertoire when you need it? Yeah. We have like I said, one defenseman who's really excellent, and last year there's a flag down, and the guy's trying to hold that ball for as long as he can. Like, man, throw the kitchen sink at him, and sure enough, he throws a kayak and lands it, and it was like the whole sideline goes wild. So I think you got to teach him everything. You just got to teach him when and where to throw it, when it's appropriate. Because when he first came up to this guy who's now a junior for me, Mike Galgano, who's an excellent defender. He was throwing them like, as the guy got to GLE, and I'm like, I think you're a freshman. Maybe we want to, throw that to other parts of the field, or maybe, you're matched up, because he played for us a lot as a sophomore and even as a freshman when we had some injuries. And it's like, well, you're not on the third midfielder here. This guy's going like Michigan on the first line. I don't know if we want to be, throwing the kayak there.
It's amazing that you talked about the kayak check potentially winning you a game, because that actually happened with us too. They were trying to run out the clock. We were down by 1. The kid was like near the sideline, and our defenseman threw a rat, which he never threw. Like, I didn't even see it in practice. And he just randomly throws the kayak, and it ended up causing the turnover.
Why not, man? You know what? It's fun for the kids. You got to make, that's the one thing also with coaching defense, and it's hard. And I think that's why you see a million offensive trainers up by us. And I'm one of very few guys that actually train on defense, because you got to find ways to make doing defense fun, and teaching checks is one way. And just, I think that you got to have a variety of things that you let the kids have where they can be creative too.
I'm going to bring up what you just talked about, which was a potential offensive mind or offensive player listening to this and having to hear two defensive coaches go at it for like 30 minutes. But if you were from their perspective looking at it when you're talking about checks, and maybe when you go into, Farmingdale and you're talking to your attackman about a defender that, wants to throw a check or something like that, how do you approach that from, that perspective, the other way around?
Oh, get into those hands. The closer that you can get to him, and when you catch him reaching, change direction, right? Because, most defensemen, if you're an effective takeaway guy, you want to keep your space, that you have your stick available. And at some point, you're going to commit to that check. And when you commit to that check, that's when you got to change direction, because the guy's going to reach somewhere, protect your stick. And I think the best way to negate guys who are really great at checking, get them off ball, put them in the crease, right? Make them the slide guy, force them to get frustrated, get them frustrated. Because those guys a lot of times will slide when they don't need to slide, and they'll come chase you, And the great part of that is too, if you just really smart with your stick and you keep it tucked and you don't panic, that's the biggest thing. Don't panic. Don't get caught looking at his stick. You just focus on what you're doing, right? And, if you can get that guy sucked out, now you move the ball and you're able to re-dodge, and that guy's out of the slide package. And sometimes those guys can get caught like that.
Sure. Last lightning question here. What's the worst check that you see thrown?
Oh, dude, over the head.
Over the head. Okay.
Again, we talked about the 1%er. That's you've got to be good at punching the sky. And listen, over the head the other way is even worse. When you're going stick side and you're just holding and you think you're going to go over, I guess you can call the slicer. I don't know. Those are very low percentage to me, and you better be really good at it. It's got to be, again, the right area of the field.
Got it. I want to pick your brain on this one more time too. I know I said I want to move us on, but when you think about having a right on a right? So you're almost in that V-hold percentage as opposed to a right on a left.
Yep.
How are you teaching your defensemen to throw checks in those separate scenarios, right? Because it is fundamentally different. You're 100%. Much more exposed right on right.
And there's also just different checks that you throw righty on righty, right? So that's what when we teach them, we almost run an entire arc around the field with an offensive guy. And we're talking about, all right, in this quadrant, this is what you're throwing. In this way, when we go back the other direction, this is what you're throwing. So obviously, when you're righty on lefty, you're actually kind of limited in the arsenal of checks that you can throw, right? You got your front side wrap check, you've got your slicer, but that's kind of it. Actually, righty on righty allows you to have more of an arsenal of checks. You've got your drop check where you're just kind of getting back and forth and you're dropping it down. You got your ding dong, you've got your kayak check. If you want to get crazy in there, you got your Batman check if the guy rolls off the kayak, and then you're really throwing the kitchen sink at him.
I just had like a PTSD flashback of just like talking as defensive coaches for 30 minutes and talking all about checking and nothing about foot position or anything like that, man. I'm sure we're breaking some rules, but yeah, let's get to that in the post half of the episode. As we kind of round out, I would love to talk about how you're teaching positioning and where you're kind of, having your guys push guys and the footwork stuff. But you did go to Albany and you had a career there, and being coached by Scott Marr, like that's freaking awesome. I think he's like one of the most notable coaches in the game. I'm interested, man, how your career went, and I just would love to hear about it.
So it was really cool. Like, I grew up back in the day where you didn't go to a million prospect days and you didn't play travel lacrosse. You just kind of played high school ball, and you went to a recruiting event, and you got to go on all 5 official visits. And Scott would just started at Albany. I think I was his 3rd year. I was his 2nd recruiting class. And my best friend and I were both able to go there together. And we went on our official visit and got a chance to really get to know Coach and just the vibe that he had there with the kids that were there and our hosts and stuff like that. And we committed pretty shortly thereafter. And, I was lucky enough. We won 3 conference titles my freshman, sophomore, and junior year. Being the 2nd recruiting class, we were definitely a little bit smaller. There was only 5 of us. But then the year after my senior year, they went to the quarterfinals right after that. It was just, Scott, I think, taught me a lot about life almost more than about lacrosse. I give him a lot of credit for how I am as a coach, but I think, he was a really good father figure to me while I was in college and about how to go about business, and taught me a lot about becoming a young man and about how to be responsible and things like that. So, and just the vibe of the team, it was really cool to be around Coach, and you could just tell that he's a great guy because people always want to be in his office, right? Like everybody wants to hang out, chill before a lift, and he almost has to kick us out of there to get us to go lift and do those kinds of things.
Where would the team cross the line where Coach Marr would have to like step in and be like, be the mean? Is there like a mean coach,
Oh man, I don't want to give too much away here. Yeah, we had some moments at Albany where we definitely got ourselves in some trouble. Where we saw the other side of Coach. You definitely won't want to see the other side of Coach Marr, but it does exist. But for the most part, you know what? The good is so good and the bad can be so bad that we always tried our best to make sure that the good stayed good, and that's, I think,
love that.
And it is, it's a love of Scotty. It's, I think that's how we all felt when we played for him. And, it kept us 95% of the days were really good.
Yeah,
when it was bad, you paid the price.
But that's the good thing about coaches like that. When it's bad, as opposed to being a boy who cried wolf, where they're like, "Oh, coach is yelling at me again. Like, what the hell is he yelling at me for?" You did something. But so from a defensive perspective, I know this is a defensive heavy episode, but like playing on the defense, I'm assuming he kind of played the same free flowing offense that they play now and have played his entire time there. How do you look at that, man? Because that can put a lot of pressure on a defense when it's like a lot of possessions, very like risk taking on the offense leading back the other way. How did you guys look at that from the D perspective?
So it was pretty cool. Like, I had a great defensive coach, John Speck, who had a great coaching career and is now coaching high school, I believe, in New Jersey. But I always felt bad for John because he was a young defensive coordinator and we kind of early on at Albany, that was where we made our bread and butter. We were really good defensively. We had a great goalie in this guy, Kevin Ray, for my first 3 years. And now we had Brett Queener my senior year. And, it was always like, oh, we're defense. We got to limit them to goals against. But we were still playing very fast on the other end. And the face-off thing wasn't always fantastic for us either. So we were kind of trying to figure that out. But it was cool in the fact that, like, Coach really practiced and preached that the first 3 guys that cross the midfield line, those are the guys that get to play offense. So as a defenseman, you're like, all right, when I get this ground
That's
ball, I'm
sick.
going to try and take off. Or like the goalie makes a save, like, yeah, I'm going to break out hard because I know, like, if I'm one of those first three guys, I get free 20 seconds to go play and see if I can go out and go get myself something. And it's really funny because I got to play, like I said, with Brett Wiener my senior year. And Brett really took advantage of that. So, I mean, Brett was a guy who was usually the first guy across the midfield line, even though he was the
As the
goalie,
goalie.
which led to me actually having a couple saves my senior year when he did turn the ball
That's
over.
awesome.
But I mean, like, even in practice, you're like, the ball comes down on a break with him and the ball in his stick. You're like, oh boy, we better stop Brett. like, forget about the point attackman, even though he's an All-American. Like, we got to actually make sure the goalie doesn't dunk this on us right now.
That's awesome, man. That free flowing play. Like, what else did you guys kind of learn? The midfield concept, the way that you phrased it right there, first three over, get to play offense. I'm using that 100%.
Yeah.
But what are some other concepts clearing wise? Like, once you guys had that turnover, how did you guys go about thinking about it? Because again, there's a lot of coaches that just don't teach that to their defensemen. They're like, get to your spots and make the overthrow. Not get the hell up the field.
Yeah, I mean, and he was just, you go to the crease, you fill in the trail. We did a ton of it in practice. I mean, like we did, Maryland box or build up, whatever you want to call it. That is a staple of Albany lacrosse. And even just full field. I mean, constantly taking the ball. And just when you thought that the offense was kind of getting stagnant, bang, new ball, go. Everybody raced down the other end of the field. And just, it wasn't overly scripted. It was just teaching guys about, where are you on the field? Are you the first guy down? Try and get ahead of it. The last guy down, you're the trailer. Stay high. Be a threat. Step in. Don't. It's one of the things that I really try to teach, especially our poles off the face-off game and stuff like that. Is like you should never be in a rush to get off the field. If it's lacrosse, you should want to play it. We'll let you know when it's time to come off, and you've earned that right if you're playing LSM to probably be in that mix of getting to go down there and make some decisions and enter some advantages in the subbing game. So I thought it was really cool the way that he taught it. Like I said, it was never like you have to set a down pick or anything else like that. It was let the ball do the work and get ahead of it and play fast and as hard as you can.
Yeah, talk to me about the Thompsons and then where Albany is today. And then let's get to Farmingdale as well. I'd love to see from your coaching perspective where you've taken this program. But the Thompsons just changed the game, like you said. Let me know from an alumni perspective, like how that was watching those guys.
So, I mean, it was awesome. Like, I was at that game where they lost to Hofstra on the tape, and it was just so cool being there at Hofstra. And, like, the whole stadium was rooting for Albany. It was really
Notre
cool.
Dame game, correct, right?
It was Notre Dame in the quarterfinal, yeah. And I'm like, this is incredible. Everybody here is fired up to see these guys play. And it was really cool because early on, Miles and Ty actually got some resistance, and so did Lyle early on in their careers. People don't understand that, like, their freshman and sophomore years, they got criticized a lot for the way that they played because they had some struggles, and Lyle wasn't playing attack, he was playing midfield and just, face-offs, and there's a million factors in the equation, right? But what does everybody want to do when you don't have success? Everybody points the finger at the guy who's playing differently. And then all of a sudden it starts like really working. And I mean, to me, just as a fan of the game and a fan of defense, I remember watching them play Harvard one year, and Steven Jahelka, who is a stud defenseman at Harvard and out of Garden City, is trying to cover Miles. And he sticks like 4 of those shots in a row where he comes to the 5x5 and just rips it over his shoulder, drives left and rips it over his shoulder righty. And I think now you're seeing it with Joey Spallina, right? And what I was looking at from a defensive standpoint is like, oh my God, how do you stop that? Like, I've never got a clean shot at his hands. His hands are always between, his body is always between him and his hands. Or he's shooting it over his shoulder this way. And you're like,
yeah,
what do you do against that? Right? You could be physical. And Steven was trying to be physical with him, but he had just practiced that shot enough times. And like the goalie, you're reading the stick. Good luck.
Well, Landis covered him, that year, or I'm assuming that year, but he did a pretty good job. Like, I remember watching that game, being like, "Holy crap!" Landis actually is the only guy that I've ever seen do that. And to your point about 1%, is probably the only guy that can play like that.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say about Lyle. It was amazing watching him play, but now as a guy who coaches high school, you're like, all right, guys, that backhanded shot, he was a 1%er. Like, you better practice that a million times in your backyard and be really good at it before you start backhanding shots in big moments, And we have some guys who scored. I had a sophomore who was his first game on varsity. We had just taken him off the JV and started him in a game because had some injuries, and he backhanded a goal against Manhasset. And I was like, wow, I didn't see that one coming. Like, kudos to you. But it's cool just the creativity and like to see guys at least try that stuff, you know?
They changed the game, man, really, in such a beautiful way too. Like that twister that Tevlin threw in the national championship, it was just like, oh, this is beautiful.
And I also just think like a confidence with the ball, right? I mean, like that to me, watching them was like bananas. Watching them have such confidence, no matter whether they were posted up and the guy was trying to be physical with them, or they were running in space and guys were trying to just beat them up, and like nothing seemed to faze them. It didn't change the way they played. It didn't change their willingness for creativity. And I know that Coach Marr has always had like, you know, a huge respect for the Native American heritage of the game. Even before those guys were there, when he had his old office, he had a huge mural of a Native American painting outside the office. So it was really cool to see, like, you know, Albany get the recognition, see Scott get the recognition he deserved, all while respecting a game that has that Native American tradition with three guys who played together, and you could just tell the chemistry. Like, again, I just think there was such a testimony back to like the value of like backyard creative lacrosse. Like when you're 5 or 6 years old and you first pick up that stick, like it's okay to not shoot it overhand. Like maybe I am going to backhand. And, you know, it's cool to watch those guys do those things and just, you know, creative. Just work on things that people don't see every day.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we haven't seen more Native American players kind of really, you know, take over the game like they did. I mean, it's hard. They won the damn Tewaaraton, but in a way, they've created Native American players. The style, you know what I mean? You have that style now, and that's just so awesome. I'm super interested in what you've taken from some of the conversations with Coach Caputo and Gabrielli, I think was the one that Pat told me that you had spoke to, but also like who do you look at in the college game and kind of take things from that you're like, yes, this is defensively, this is it.
Well, I mean, you know, especially early on, I was watching a lot of those Jerry Byrne videos that he was first posting, and they're excellent. I mean, obviously he's done a great job of coaching defense when he was at Notre Dame and obviously now at Harvard. But I think it was 2 winters ago, Anthony Tefano, who's a Farmingdale guy, who's an assistant coach at Carey, he's like, you know what? We should get on the phone with Coach Gabrielli, Coach Caputo. It was following the thing I did with PSL, where it was all about communication drills. And those guys were nice enough. I think we met for like 6 Mondays in a row on Zoom meetings at like 8 o'clock at night. And we just talked lacrosse and talked about sliding and terminology. And I said the first thing that you get to take away when you look at the college game and you talk to those guys, they're coaching the exact same things we are, right? Like college kids are kids, and the game is the game, right? There are guys that are making some of the same mistakes that we're making in high school. You're trying to force guys out of bad habits. You're working on approaches. You're working on communication, understanding things like that. You know, and just, you know, I learned a lot of stuff about the verbiage they use. We talked a lot about pairs, which has really paid huge dividends the last 2 years because. And when we've gotten to those state playoffs, when we played a lot of real high-level teams, you see more and more of the pairs offense coming into play. And also a lot about philosophy about crash sliding, you know, sliding top down from wings and stuff like that, which we've incorporated a lot into our slide packages. Just the philosophy behind that, because, like, you know, when I went to college, the idea was you turn guys at goal line, the slide comes from the crease or from coma. And that's just not always the way it is now. And now it's also allowed us, you know, to become multiple at Farmingdale and some of the stuff that we do and understanding the logic behind it also about like why we want to do this and how it really benefits and advantages of maybe sliding to a guy's face as he drives upfield and things like that.
Gotcha.
Also got a ton of cool drills because those guys film everything. So it's awesome to get to see what those guys do on a daily basis.
Just to kind of give it more context, you're basically talking about guys driving from X and you're sliding adjacently down, right?
Yeah.
Where you're not sliding from inside, turning the guy inside.
Especially versus like big littles and stuff like that, where, you know, you're going to have to draw a slide more often than not. And just that ability to show if you can. You know, I thought that was great. They were talking about, you know, you start at 10, you try to show to 7, you try to get back to 10 without having to really slide, so you're crowding that space. And then if you have to go about where you want to position your guys on the crease, that they can kind of spit out to those wings and things like that. So a lot of those little nuances that get lost when you're watching a game and how guys slide. It was really cool to have the time to sit down with those guys and understand the verbiage they use, the markers they use, the drills they use to teach it, and the logic behind it. Because I think that whenever you're coaching defense, you got to have the logic. Even when you're coaching lacrosse in general, you got to be able to explain to kids the why about what is the benefit of doing it this way.
How do you look at that being, you said you're not doing much fall work, but in the preseason and then into the season, how are you staggering that kind of knowledge for those guys, right? You're not hitting them with everything on the first day or first week.
Yeah.
How do you look about implementing that throughout the season? Like what is primary and then what is more kind of plug and play as you go?
So we've been really fortunate at Farmingdale over the last couple of years. We actually have like a bubble in town. It's a soccer bubble. And we go there 2 days a week starting in like the last week in November. So we get like 24 sessions in with grades 9 through 12. Where we take everybody in there. We spend about 45 minutes of every session doing positional work. And it's just D guys with D guys, goalies with goalies, offensive guys on their own. And so, I think one of the things that Coach Hungerford, who coached with me beforehand, he always said, I thought was really kind of interesting. He's like, in football, every year, we pretend like they know nothing, And so we do the same thing now in lacrosse. We come in and the first thing we do in every clinic, every time the first season is stance, and it's like you have your guys who are 4 years and they got it and they kind of correct it. And they'll still screw it up a little bit sometimes. But I mean, for young guys, like you have to start with the stance because so many guys have their hands too wide on the stick or too close together. So many guys are under the illusion of like, when I break down, I want my feet even and wide, and it's like, this isn't basketball. This is very, very different. You need to have your feet under you. We prefer to have your feet staggered, and so we got to go from that. And I usually try to build in a basic concept that we're going to do. Like I was actually talking about this coach for the other day who's now running training out for Mad Dog. And we're talking about how do I kind of structure these individual defensive sessions. It's like a basic concept, like maybe stance or something like that. Then we want to get into building off of what we did last session. Then we're going to teach a concept, whether it's how we're approaching the ball, how we're turning guys at goal line, how we're squeezing guys at goal line, defending a bounce, defending, inside rolls. And then we usually get a live portion of it where we're going D guys on D guys. It was cool. Listen to Coach Morgan. He used the term Powerball. We use that for our drills. I can give you a little cool way we do it up at Farmingdale. We have a drill called the same way that we have all variations of. So we do a Powerball live session where you get to have real kind of guys thumping on each other and making sure we're getting hands and make it realistic. And then we'll have something where there brings in a slide component with that exact same skill. We always want to start working early on in those slide components because, again, I'm a huge believer in the nuances of off-ball play and communication.
So, Eric, we're 50 minutes in today's episode. What I would love to do if you have time is kind of break these episodes up, maybe have you back in like 2 weeks' time to talk about off-ball and that stuff, because I just don't think we'll get to a lot of those nuances in the 10 minutes we have left.
That's all good.
Can you give me a little bit of the Farmingdale stuff while we're here? I would love to talk about, your guys' kind of growth since you've taken over the program. When did you take over the program? And I'd love to talk about the 23 season too, man.
Yeah, so it was, I started coaching in Farmingdale in 2011. It was actually my first year. We won our first state championship. And then we kind of had a little bit of a dip for a bit. And we kind of been building it up. And we've reached a really good place. And my running joke is always, I never wanted to be the head coach. I always felt like I was the smartest guy in the room being the assistant. You get to coach lacrosse with none of the paperwork, none of the rosters, none of the fundraising. I tried to help out as much as I could, but I knew at the end of the day, Coach Hungerford or Coach Hartraff kind of had that going for him. So, I was lucky to learn under Coach Hartraff, who has 700 wins at Farmingdale, along with countless titles. And then Coach Hungerford took over, who I was happy to assist him. And he has a lot of great perspectives on lacrosse and how to run a program, and learned a lot from him. But he was getting towards the end of his career, and he got this opportunity with Mad Dog where he was like, in December, he's like, I'm going. I can remember the conversation. He told me he thought this was the 24-year season was going to be his last year. But he was getting on a plane to go to San Diego. I'm like, Mike, you ever been to San Diego? He's like, no. I'm like, you're not coming back, buddy. Like,
Yeah, fair.
That's going to be a tough sell to come back to the Northeast in December after that. So I took over in December. So I was kind of scrambling, It's
This was this past year?
This was this past year.
Wow. Okay.
And so we had a lot of challenges, like we had just went to the state final in 23. We graduated 18 seniors off of that team. They were really good. We had a lot of good pieces coming back. But you just never know from year to year. We had to move a lot of guys around this year to different positions to find the success that we did. And, all of a sudden it's the first year that Nassau County is doing the Power League. So I think my first game, we played Garden City. And,
Holy shit.
we were like playing different guys at different spots. It's some guy's first varsity game. The next thing I look up and it's like 12-0. I'm like, here we go. I'm getting shut out in my first varsity game. And we ended up scoring 2 goals. Thank you to Coach Fennell for letting us get 2 at the end there. And so obviously sitting in that locker room afterwards and looking at who we had, I think we had like the next day we played North Shore, we played Roslyn, who was pretty good. And then we had like Manhasset, Wantagh, and somebody else, all of which ended up being either in the county final or won the counties. So we hit the gauntlet there pretty early. So it was a quick learning curve. Luckily, like I said, I've got a great coaching staff around me and I've got some experience doing this for a long time. But, we kind of kept shuffling the deck and the kids kept buying in and coming and working. And, like I said, everybody kind of finds their role. And then all of a sudden we kind of caught heat. Really, ironically, the turning point for us was the Massapequa game where we kind of came out and Pequa had just beaten Wantagh. We had just lost to Wantagh pretty significantly. And we kind of came out and rumor was the Pequa guys were going to put it on us. And we kind of flipped the script and put it on them. And, I kind of got these shirts made up that said together. I said, guys, we're playing pretty well defensively. We're playing pretty well offensively at times. We're playing pretty well defensively at times. It seems that we're struggling at these mesh points. We were struggling at times in the clear. We were struggling at times in understanding situation. We couldn't get the defense to play well on the same day that the offense was playing well. We had some finger pointing going back and forth. So, the message was kind of like, if we're going to do this, we got to all get together and we got to just, do your job and worry about your job. And as long as we do that, we'll be in great shape. And then I don't think we lost again until the state final, unfortunately.
Oh, man. What happened in the state final?
Oh,
that's awesome, by the way. Up to that. I don't mean to end it.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's all good. I mean, listen, you get to the state final. I've won one as a player. I've won one as an assistant coach. I've lost it as an assistant coach the year before. We had our opportunities in the final. We had the ball in our best player's hand, and he took a shot, and goalie saved it. They kind of pitched it down, came down, and they scored a goal. And it's kind of surreal. Like when we won it as a coach, we won in overtime. The whole sideline explodes. It's so funny. You're so dialed in as a coach. They score the goal, and I look up, and I'm like, oh, there's a minute 40 left on the clock. Like we can still get this back. I'm like, not in sudden death. You can't. Like.
Yeah. OT,
so,
yep.
You're like, oh, dude. And then it kind of starts to sink in. You feel bad for the kids, I'm going to do this probably another 15, 16 years, God willing, until I retire. Who knows about after that. But for some of those guys, it was their last game. And, it was just a great ride. It was actually to rein the boys in because the day before practice, we kept keeping count every day of practice, right? I think we were like practice 65 or something like that the day before the state final. So we start winning the playoffs, and it's like we got to make it to practice 65. And so that day, the guys like the boom boxes raring in the locker room and like had to reel them back in that day before and be like, there's still a lacrosse game to win. So, we came out a little slow in that game, but we were able to battle back and unfortunately lost in overtime to a McQuaid Jesuit team that was pretty talented. So, heartbreaking to lose it 2 years in a row, but if you had to tell me every day to sign up for the experience that we have with those kids getting to that last day, I'll sign up every time.
Yeah, man, I can tell the love of the game comes through this discussion, man. So I'm sure your kids appreciate a coach that feels that way about the game, and I'm sure you're doing a great job, dude. I appreciate you kind of even the loss, kind of opening it up and talking about it a little bit. I've definitely had those. Let me go into a quick overtime question, just because we're kind of right here in like the game scenarios and things like that. 30 seconds left. You're up by 1. You're on the defensive end of the ball, right? I know there's a ton of nuance. I played this game a couple of times with some coaches. They're like, well, who's got, like, do they have 2 attackmen? Do they have the stud midi? Like, what are you telling your guys in the last 30 seconds in that timeout up by 1?
It's so funny that you say that because I am like, you sent me that question. And I'm like, well, man, there's a lot of factors. Like, you got to identify personnel. You got to identify who's starting with the ball, all those types of things. But I mean, basic philosophy for our guys, when we have to default to these types of situations, we are getting a guy on ball. Usually, like the last couple of years, we've had D-middies that have been so good that I'm probably putting a short stick on the ball regardless. And no disrespect to my poles, they've also been we've had some great guys the last couple of years. But we're going to get into what we consider like almost like a man zone. We call it monster. It's 4 poles on the perimeter with a 1 short stick in the crease. And we kind of rotate into it. So we have calls of where we're coming from. So like if that guy's going, let him go. We'll have a slide built in, and it allows the poles to play on the perimeter so that if guys are looking for that seal and slip, we're ready for it. We're getting out to shooter's hands with the poles. And the short stick is usually the guy who plays man down for us. He's used to seeing seal and slips where he's going to be kind of crafty at looking for that idea. And then the idea is once we slide and we get committed, pressure the ball wherever it is. Because somebody there is going to be looking to feed somebody. And so if we can get into guys' hands and disrupt that play, that's what we're looking to do.
All right, other overtime question. What's your favorite drill and why?
Oh, I think I have 2 here, but we're running out of time. So
we got 2. You got 2. Give me all you got.
All right, I got the first one I love is with this drill we call pass the torch. We have 3 defenders playing with only 2 sticks. So we have a dodger up top, a relay guy, and a dodger at the opposite corner. We start with the dodge off down the alley, and the guy on ball has a stick, and the hot guy has a stick. The backside help low defender does not have a stick. So we fire, we recover. The guy who's on the backside is yelling, get here, so he can get the stick from the recovery guy. And now the ball gets relayed back across the top because we get a little rollback, throwback, and then a dodge, throw to the corner. So now the guy who recovered, he has no stick, but he's hot. And so he's got to get the guy who was the original slide guy to recover in as the second slide, and he can get a stick so he can slide. It sounds very complicated. I can send you a video of it.
No, I love it.
The reason why I love it is it forces guys after they slide to realize that they are now the 2, right? And it gets guys the force to communicate. It's awesome. Like the first couple times you do it, the hot guy who like is the hot to the second dodge is standing there with no stick. Like, I'm hot. I'm like, what are you sliding with, dude? Like, you got to get the guy in from the backside.
Yeah.
You know? And just like the frustration from the hot guy sometimes too. And that second slide guy, the original slide guy is like hanging out there. He's like, yo, man, like, you got to get in.
I need your stick. Yeah, I've never seen the trading of sticks in a drill before. So I send me that video. I'll add it into the show.
Yeah. I'll definitely send that to you. And the other one is we call the crisis drill. And again, I think these are all about, I'm a huge believer in communication being the most important skill that we do. So what we'll do is we'll have 6 offensive players on the perimeter and a line of defense up at the top of the box in pull short order. So it's always going big, little, big, little, big, little. So with our 6 offensive players, everybody's got a ball in their stick. There's 2 guys up at the top of the box in the alleys. There's a guy in each wing, and there's 2 guys at X on either pipe. And we start with a big little 2-on-2 anywhere on the field, right? So you play out that 2-on-2, whether it's a shot, a turnover. The idea is once that ball is out of play, I blow the whistle and I immediately point to one of the other offensive guys who has that ball in his stick, and he attacks. And we add a defender. Well, the one rule is the defender that enters the drill cannot stop the ball.
So he's in recovery mode?
Yeah, so he's got to get into the backside of the defense. And also, the thing I like about it too is that mentality of never relaxing on defense, right? So that ball goes out of bounds, that shot gets taken, you better pay attention to where that next guy is coming from, and you better get there in a hurry, or he's coming walking in, and that like awareness of looking at like, you know, where's this guy coming from, scrambling, communicating, I got ball, you know, guys on the backside trying to get here. And so it's an even, because I feel like sometimes when everything we do is uneven, it always benefits the offense. I get so tired of that after a while, right? Everything's an odd man situation. Make those guys play even a little bit too, but give them that temporarily, you know, odd man situation where they got to do it.
But yeah, it's like it's increasing friction, but not so much so that you're giving them that full advantage. I love that. I don't think guys understand that maybe don't get enough playing time. How if they develop that part where they're always on defense and can kind of know where to go and also maybe help their teammates, that could get you on the field, you know, because it doesn't take skill. I mean, it's skill,
100%.
but not lacrosse skill, if that makes sense.
I'll be honest, that was one of the few, my role at Albany a lot of times was not necessarily go cover the best guy. I played a lot of man down, and I played a lot of crease defender where I was just doing my best job of communicating to guys and trying to get guys in the right positions, you know? So I have a full appreciation for that, and I just think that I love Coach O'Durn up at Syracuse is, I think, one of the really good young coaches doing defense. I had the opportunity to coach John when he was younger, and he worked for me when we were doing PSL, and I think the world of him, but he had a great saying when we were doing stuff with young kids later on. We were talking about communication drills, and he's like, 6 guys doing the wrong thing together have a higher success chance than 6 guys doing the right thing on their own.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
So it just goes to show you, like, that communication, like you said, helping guys to get to where they belong. It's really so important. That's a whole other podcast that you and I could do where we talk about communication and stuff like that. But I really appreciate you having us on, and it's great.
Yeah, Coach Dunne, I appreciate you hopping on, man, and this has been a fantastic discussion. I love that last phrase that you kind of ended that with, and honestly, I've loved this entire conversation. So part 2, we got to lock that in. I got to figure out when I can get you free, but it's off season, so maybe I've got some extra time to lock it in on.
That's the time, man. While my kids are in daycare, I can always figure in a little time to slide in and talk lax.
All right, guys. I'll have all of Coach Dunne's info on some of his stuff that he likes to do from the private lesson side and the club side. I always like to kind of be able to highlight the stuff that you do off the field, man. I appreciate what you're doing for the game.
Appreciate you too, man. We'll talk soon. Thank you so much.